Picture this, a frozen wasteland stretching endlessly across Siberia. The year is 1937, and hidden beneath layers of ice and snow lie secrets that Stalin's regime desperately tried to bury forever. But some truths refused to stay buried. What if I told you that scattered across remote Soviet labor camps, prisoners were secretly writing letters? Not just any letters, but final testimonies, desperate pleas, and intimate confessions that would later become the most powerful evidence of one of history's darkest chapters. These weren't meant to be found, they were never supposed to survive. Yet somehow, they did. Today, I'm going to take you deep into the heart of the Gulag system during Stalin's Great Terror of 1937, through the eyes of those who lived it. And more importantly, through their own words. Words they risked everything to preserve. Words that reveal truths so shocking, they'll change how you see one of the 20th century's greatest monsters forever. But before we dive into this incredible story, I need you to do me a favor. If you find this content as mind-blowing as I know you will, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. These stories need to be told, and your support helps me bring you more of these hidden historical truths that mainstream media won't touch. Let me start with a story that still gives me chills. In the summer of 1937, a middle-aged engineer named Mikhail Petrov was arrested in Moscow on charges of counter-revolutionary activities. His crime, he had questioned, in private conversation, why food was becoming so scarce, while the newspapers proclaimed abundance. That single moment of doubt cost him everything. Within days, Mikhail found himself on a cattle car bound for the frozen wilderness of Siberia. But Mikhail did something extraordinary, something that would have meant immediate execution if discovered. He began documenting his experience, letter by letter, hiding his words in the most ingenious ways imaginable. You see, in 1937, Stalin wasn't just conducting a purge, he was orchestrating the systematic elimination of anyone who might pose even the slightest threat to his absolute power. The numbers are staggering. Between 1937 and 1938 alone, approximately 1.3 million people were arrested, and nearly 700,000 were executed. But these aren't just statistics. They're human beings whose voices were meant to be silenced forever. The Gulag system during this period was a machine designed not just to punish, but to erase. Prisoners weren't just isolated from society, they were cut off from all human connection. Mail was strictly censored, writing materials were forbidden, and communication with the outside world was virtually impossible. The regime understood something crucial. Control the narrative, and you control history itself. But here's where the story gets incredible. Despite every obstacle, despite the constant surveillance and brutal conditions, prisoners found ways to communicate. They wrote on birch bark, on scraps of cloth, even on their own skin. They carved messages into wooden planks and hid letters in the most unlikely places. These weren't just messages, they were acts of rebellion against a system designed to make them disappear. Take the case of Anna Dmitrievna, a schoolteacher arrested for allegedly spreading anti-Soviet propaganda. Her real crime was teaching children to think critically. In her hidden letters, discovered decades later, she wrote, "They can break our bodies, but they cannot break our spirits. Someone must remember. Someone must tell the world what happened here." The psychological warfare employed in the Gulag was as brutal as the physical conditions. Prisoners were deliberately given false hope through propaganda about rehabilitation and reintegration into Soviet society. They were told their loved ones had abandoned them, that their letters weren't being delivered because no one cared to receive them. The isolation was absolute and intentional. But the most heartbreaking aspect of these secret letters isn't what they reveal about the conditions. It's what they reveal about the human spirit under unimaginable pressure. These men and women, facing certain deaths, chose to spend their final moments not cursing their fate, but preserving their humanity through words. One letter, written by a priest named Father Alexei, reads, "My dear son, if you ever read this, know that I died not as a criminal, but as a man who refused to bow to evil. Remember that love is stronger than hate, and truth outlasts all lies." This letter was found sewn into the lining of a jacket, discovered by archaeologists in 1991, over 50 years after it was written. The logistics of hiding these letters required incredible ingenuity. Prisoners developed an entire underground communication network. They used coded language that guards wouldn't understand, created invisible ink from their own blood, and established elaborate systems for smuggling messages between camps. Some letters were passed from prisoner to prisoner for years before reaching their intended destination. What makes 1937 particularly significant isn't just the scale of the terror, it's the systematic nature of it. Stalin had issued Order No. 00447, which established quotas for arrests and executions. Regional officials competed to exceed their quotas, turning human suffering into a perverse game of statistics. The randomness was the point. Anyone could be next, creating a climate of absolute fear. But within this machinery of death, something unexpected happened. The shared suffering created bonds that transcended the divisions the regime tried to maintain. Political prisoners, common criminals, intellectuals, and peasants found common cause in their humanity. Their letters reveal not just individual stories, but a collective testimony to the power of human connection in the face of systematic dehumanization. One of the most remarkable discoveries was a collection of letters found in the permafrost near Vorkuta in 1987. These letters, preserved by the extreme cold, contained detailed accounts of daily life in the camps, the backbreaking labor, the inadequate food, the constant threat of violence, but they also contained something more precious: expressions of love, hope, and an unshakable belief in human dignity. The regime's greatest fear was that these stories would reach the outside world. They understood that personal testimonies had the power to undermine their carefully constructed propaganda. This is why the discovery of these letters, decades later, was so devastating to the Soviet Union's historical narrative. These weren't the words of enemies of the people. They were the voices of teachers, engineers, doctors, farmers, and ordinary citizens whose only crime was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Consider the letter of Dr. Vladimir Kozlov, a physician arrested for treating political prisoners with excessive compassion. His final letter, written on scraps of medical gauze, describes not his own suffering, but his determination to maintain his medical ethics even in the face of death. "I took an oath to heal, not to harm. If maintaining that oath costs me my life, so be it." The emotional impact of these letters extends beyond their historical significance. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the capacity for both cruelty and heroism that exists within us all. They challenge us to ask difficult questions. What would we do in similar circumstances? Would we have the courage to resist? Would we risk everything to preserve our humanity? The discovery process of these letters is a story in itself. When the Soviet Union collapsed and archives began opening in the 1990s, historians and archaeologists embarked on a massive effort to uncover the truth about the Gulag system. They found letters hidden in walls, buried in the permafrost, and tucked away in secret compartments that had remained undiscovered for decades. Each discovery brought new revelations about the scope and nature of Soviet repression. But more importantly, each letter brought back to life a human being who had been deliberately erased from history. These weren't just documents, they were resurrections, giving voice to the voiceless and presence to the disappeared. The technical challenges of preserving these letters were immense. Many were written on materials that deteriorated quickly: bark, cloth, paper, made from whatever materials prisoners could find. The extreme conditions of the Siberian wilderness had both preserved and damaged these documents. Restoration specialists worked for years to make many of them readable again. What emerged from this painstaking work was a portrait of the Gulag system that differed dramatically from both Soviet propaganda and Western assumptions. These weren't just concentration camps, they were laboratories for testing the limits of human endurance and the effectiveness of psychological warfare on an industrial scale. The letters reveal sophisticated systems of resistance that historians never suspected. Prisoners created underground schools, held secret religious services, and maintained elaborate networks for sharing news and supporting each other's morale. They developed their own culture, their own codes of honor, and their own ways of maintaining dignity in the face of systematic degradation. One particularly moving series of letters documents the story of Maria Volkonsky, a noblewoman arrested for associating with foreign elements. She had been teaching French to neighborhood children. Her letters, written over a period of 3 years, chronicle her transformation from a sheltered aristocrat to a hardened survivor. But they also show her unwavering commitment to helping other prisoners maintain their humanity. The children's stories are perhaps the most heartbreaking. Many families were arrested together, and children as young as 8 found themselves in the Gulag system. Their letters, when they could write them, reveal a different perspective on the horror, one filtered through the resilience and adaptability of youth, but also marked by profound loss and confusion. These discoveries have forced historians to completely revise their understanding of the Great Terror. The scale was larger than anyone imagined, but so was the resistance. The regime's control was absolute, but so was the determination of its victims to maintain their humanity and preserve their stories for future generations. The international implications of these letters cannot be overstated. They provide first-hand evidence of crimes against humanity on a scale that rivals the Holocaust. They document systematic torture, mass murder, and the deliberate destruction of entire social classes. But they also document something else: the unbreakable nature of the human spirit when faced with ultimate evil. Reading these letters today, in our comfortable modern world, it's easy to dismiss them as artifacts from a bygone era, but the lessons they contain are eternal and universal. They remind us that freedom is fragile, that democracy requires constant vigilance, and that ordinary people are capable of both extraordinary evil and extraordinary heroism. The psychological insights contained in these letters are profound. They document how human beings adapt to impossible circumstances, how they maintain hope in hopeless situations, and how they find meaning in meaningless suffering. They reveal the coping mechanisms that allowed some to survive while others perished, and the random factors that often determined who lived and who died. But perhaps, most importantly, these letters serve as a warning. They show us how quickly a civilized society can descend into barbarism, how easily propaganda can replace truth, and how readily people will participate in the persecution of their neighbors. When fear overrides conscience, they remind us that it can't happen here, is the most dangerous phrase in any language. The modern relevance of these letters extends beyond historical interest. In an age of increasing authoritarianism around the world, in an era of fake news and alternative facts, these authentic voices from the past provide crucial insights into how totalitarian systems operate and how they can be resisted. The families who never knew what happened to their loved ones finally found answers in these letters. For many, it was the first concrete evidence of their relatives' fate after decades of uncertainty. The letters provided not just information, but closure. Final words from parents to children, husbands to wives, friends to friends. The preservation of these letters has become a race against time. Many more remain to be discovered, but the harsh Siberian climate that preserved them is also slowly destroying them. Archaeologists and historians work urgently to locate and preserve as many as possible before they're lost forever. What strikes me most about these letters is their humanity. Despite everything, the cold, the hunger, the brutality, the hopelessness, these people never stopped being human. They continued to love, to hope, to believe in something better. They continued to see beauty in a snowflake, to find comfort in a shared smile, to risk everything for a moment of human connection. The legacy of these letters extends far beyond their historical value. They've become symbols of resistance against oppression, testaments to the power of truth over propaganda, and proof that no regime, no matter how powerful, can completely silence the human spirit. These aren't just letters, they're acts of faith. Faith that someone, someday, would find them and remember. Faith that truth would eventually triumph over lies. Faith that their suffering had meaning, that their voices would be heard, that their stories would be told. And they were right. We found them. We remember. We're telling their stories. As you think about these incredible stories of courage and resistance, I want you to consider something. How will you use your voice? How will you stand up to injustice? How will you ensure that the lessons of history aren't forgotten? These letters from the Gulag remind us that every voice matters, every story has value, and every act of resistance, no matter how small, can make a difference. They show us that even in the darkest times, hope survives, love endures, and truth ultimately prevails. If this story has moved you, if it's opened your eyes to a part of history you never knew, please do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and share this video with others. These stories need to be told, these voices need to be heard, and these lessons need to be remembered. What do you think about these incredible testimonies from one of history's darkest periods? Do you believe we're doing enough to preserve these stories and learn from them? Have you ever wondered what you would do in similar circumstances? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to hear your perspective on these powerful stories. Remember, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, but those who remember it, who share it, and who learn from it, they're the ones who can change the world. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and never forget the power of a single voice to change everything. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.